You can also check you out on YouTube, on Facebook.
Oh, I'm on YouTube and Facebook. I think I'm everywhere. I don't know.
I think John was in my office the other day, and he did a video. He saw on my desk I had a banana guard, which is a small little box which will prevent your banana from being bruised in a bag, etc. And we found it fascinating, and there's loads of videos on there about product design and these stories around products, etc. And it was good.
Yeah, it's always disappointing when my most popular video is about the banana guard.
John, just before I have one question for you. You're talking about there using storytelling from your community. Have you got any examples of how you can use a brand story, and maybe how maybe for the startups, how can a brand use their own story about how they got created?
Yeah, this is kind of what I do most of the time. I kind of geared this more towards social media and managing the community. What I do most of the time is help individuals in the context of leadership coaching or brand coaching tell their stories of identity. And I think your stories of identity, to me, they always start with your founder stories. And if you're a young startup, why are you here? Why are you doing this? And how did this all happen? Obviously, it's trickier than it sounds, because you don't want your story to be just about you and self-absorbed. I always say you have to learn to talk about yourself and tell your story without talking about yourself. And that is a little bit tricky, but I think the mistake that a lot of companies make is they don't talk enough about their story, where they come from, why they do what they do, where they're going. Those are the things that, I think all good companies do, and traditional companies do it as well. A few examples. IKEA. IKEA does a really good job telling their story, and their story of identity is really who they are. I don't know what you know about IKEA, but they make the point that, we come from a small town and we're frugal and the elements are tough, and that's why every day we're trying to make things sturdier for you and less expensive for you, because in our small town in Sweden, that's what the town's about. Things like that. Even companies like Nike. Nike really tells their stories well. And I don't want to hit on Starbucks too much, but I think when my friends at Starbucks, I tell them, you guys could be telling much better stories. Yeah. When I go to the Starbucks website, I'd like to know about the people picking the coffee. I'd like to know about, that everything. And I think there are all kinds of stories out there. We don't use storytelling enough. We really don't.
Okay, I'm going to open it up. Is there any other questions for John? It means you did a really good presentation. No. Is there any questions? Is there any questions on Twitter? No?
It means they're bored and tired.
Yeah, in fact, there's one question. Once one starts, I'm sure we'll get more.
Okay, actually, I'm not going to ask you a question about my startup, but more about bands, because I play in bands too. But what happens if the story of your band sucks? Does that mean that you will never find a way to make people discover your music in a good way?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll have to get more specific about that, because your band is no good or the story's no good.
No, it's just a hypothesis.
I don't know. No, obviously, and I say this, I say this to my students all the time. You probably know more about these things than I do in your day-to-day experience. But I think the real danger of viral messages today is bad messages get out more than good messages. So, and I have, I interviewed a lot of people about this kind of thing. Bad news, it's always been true in marketing that bad news travels better than good news. So it's, if there's a bad story about you, like, I don't know, you probably know this story. There's a story about a Canadian musician called Dave Carroll. Do you know that this is a very famous viral story on the net. Dave Carroll, I'll tell you a short version of it. Dave Carroll was not a very well-known musician, but he was a folk singer, and he traveled to small towns. And he got on United Airlines, and he had a very expensive guitar that they asked him to check. And United Airlines actually broke the guitar. Okay, so the interesting thing is, United Airlines years ago, even a few years ago, probably would have just handled that incident privately and not had to pay much money or whatever, And he got the traditional stonewall when he tried to talk to United about this. He tried to say, hey, you know, my guitar was mishandled, it was broken. He got standard responses back. Dear sir, we can't pay for this, et cetera, through email, through traditional mail. Okay. So he was ready to give up, and he said, well, what if I wrote a song about this? He wrote a song called United Breaks Guitars, and I think you should look this up on the internet. This song, United Breaks Guitars, went to the top of the charts. There was, in a few weeks, something like 22 million views, and United was getting inundated with phone calls from people from all over the world who had seen this video, and they were forced to do something about this guy, and a few things happened. One is, United, not only did they have to change their baggage handling policy and compensate Dave Carroll, they ended up hiring him to talk to their baggage people. And Dave Carroll became very famous because Time magazine, I think this was, I'm not sure what the year was, 2009, 2010, whatever year it was, Time magazine called it one of the 10 most important viral phenomena on the internet. Here's a guy who never would have been famous otherwise. But it's also, you know, the thing about United Airlines, people know, especially in the US, people know when you talk about United Airlines, what do they know? United breaks guitars, okay? Bad news travels fast. Kind of interesting. So I think if your band sucks, you don't want to get the word out there, because it'll travel.
Yeah, sure. Actually, thank you for the good story. I really enjoyed. But I was thinking, you know, especially today, it's very easy to find a band using Classified's website.
Sure.
So it's not a very exciting story to tell, you know. Oh, where did you guys meet? Oh, on the Classified's website, you know.
No, well, you know, I always say to people, because people, and this is one of the reasons why I think we underutilize storytelling. I always tell people, you know, I started out in academia as a professor of leadership. And I'm convinced that anyone can lead, and I show people that every day. But I say this, I say, you know, I'll be the one to tell you, and I'll be the first one to tell you that anyone can be a leader. I'll be the last one to tell you that it's easy, okay? I'll be the first person to tell you that creating a great brand story, if you have a good company and a good story, creating that story and telling that story is accessible to anyone. But I'll be the last person to tell you that it's easy. It's not just about sitting around the table and saying, okay, guys, how did we get together and let's tell the story. It's really, it's like, you know, I say it's like getting good at anything else. Getting good at telling your story is like getting good at playing tennis. You know, you have to practice. You have to get coaching. You have to get advice. You have to learn about these things. They don't just happen. So I think, you know, and I've literally consulted for thousands of companies now about how they tell their story. And I think nobody does it naturally. That's a real myth, you know, that sometimes people come together and they just tell their story. They've somehow practiced it. Maybe they practiced it because they like telling the story, but they don't, it doesn't just happen.
Okay, so my band should get your card.
Your band, yeah. I'd like to see if I could help out your band. That's
Okay, cool. There's some more questions? I knew this would happen. Sorry, excuse me.
We suck is an interesting story.
Hello. Yeah. Could you tell us more about storytelling, since definitely you know a lot about that. And the reason is this one. I think you are talking about how stories are powerful, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
And in the case of Dunkin' Donuts, you were talking about small things like people with their pictures, and they were sincere. They had nothing to gain out of that. On the other side, it happens that I attended a workshop on storytelling 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago in San Francisco. And they explained clearly how at least it was a method to fabricate a story. And I was thinking, it's not to say that I had some ethical problem, but they were kind of gathering things that have very little, I think, to do with the truth, and a lot about a myth, about something that's exciting and finally saves the day. So it's more about, is it, what's your take about that? Does it need to be sincere, or is it, as long as a story sells something, that maybe the people at Starbucks got coffee and someone helped and came from the Superman came, that and it's good. but it never happened. So what's in your practice when you talk about storytelling, work with people, what do you advise them to do?
I'm going to try to give a short answer to this question, but it's always this is the kind of question that reminds me of one time some group asked the former President Abraham Lincoln if he would come talk about leadership. And they said, well, how much time do you need? And Lincoln said, well, you know, if you want me to talk for 2 hours, I can start right now. If you want me to talk for 5 minutes, I need a few days to prepare. So I need a few days to prepare the answer to your question, because I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But my view, and there was, well, I don't know, I won't go too deeply into this, but around the time that I wrote my first book in French, which is called Les 7 règles du storytelling, another book came out that was called Storytelling, and it was by Christian Salmon, a reporter for Le Monde, who wrote about Sarkozy and his storytelling. And a few times, the two books were juxtaposed because it's a very different vision of storytelling. My view, and you can read a lot of this in the press because obviously I follow it, but you know, somebody sent me an article the other day and I was searching around and found a lot of articles that said, you know, Sarkozy's storytelling machine is getting into gear. And that type of storytelling, and I don't talk politics, I'm not for or against Sarkozy. But when they said the storytelling machine is getting into gear, it's all about manipulation. What kind of stories do we have to tell to get votes? I don't play that game at all. My thing is what I call, and you know, you can read about this if you want on my website or whatever, or in my books, but what I call authentic personal stories of identity. Okay, authentic personal stories of identity. Now, authentic personal stories of identity, if they are truly authentic, then I don't think they're manipulative. I think the key to me is authenticity. What is authenticity? Authenticity to me comes from telling a story and living the same story. When you're telling a story that you're not living, then you're not authentic. And I have lots of examples of that, both in my blog and my website and the books. But I think that I also make a distinction between authentic and true. Some stories that are authentic are not necessarily true. And when I've worked with companies, it's funny because I wanted to get to the root of some really classic corporate stories, and I often found out they weren't true. Okay? For example, I'll give you a quick example. Hewlett-Packard. There's a story that Bill Hewlett or Dave Packard, I'm not sure, it depends which version you listen to, but one day they came in on a Saturday or late one afternoon or whatever, and they found the person found a tool closet locked. Okay? He took out a tool and a hammer and he broke the lock on the tool closet and he left a note. And he said, I never want tools locked at this company because we're a company where people trust each other. Okay? A very simple story. Talking to the corporate historian at Hewlett-Packard, she told me that story probably never happened. Okay, so it's not a true story, but it's an authentic story. Because everyone who knew them would say, you know, either Bill or Dave could have done that. So it's not, I make that distinction as well. I think your story should be authentic. To me, they don't have to be completely true. I'm not saying make them up, but sometimes I help people tell their stories a little better, not by making them up, but by putting detail in that if you don't remember exactly how that happened or when that happened, we're going to tell the story with that detail in it anyway, as long as it's authentic. Does that all make sense? Okay.
Okay, we have one last quick question. Getting fit at the same time.
Hey, John.
My colleague.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about storytelling before.
No, we have. We've talked a lot. So I expect this to be a really good question.
No. I intend to ask this in the interest of everyone here. Okay, for communities, you say heroes, especially when the customer is the hero. That makes the story land. And now you mentioned authenticity. At the same time, we can probably list about another 20 ingredients to help a story get across. If you have to pick maybe one or two more, apart from being authentic and having heroes in it, what makes a story land? What makes a story so special, according to you?
You know, I think this is a great question, and in my view, I think good stories are simple, you know? And I work a lot with people on simplifying their stories, because when you ask people to tell a story, probably including myself, but you ask people to tell a story, they throw in too much detail and they get wound up in the story. And I say, you know, there's a great storyline there, but we have to simplify it. So I say they're simple, they're personal. I think being personal with your stories is very important, whether you're talking about a brand community or a leader or anybody. Why? Because we connect with emotion. You know, you connect to your audience with emotion, and a brand connects with emotion. And I can give you lots of examples of that as well, brand stories that are in some way emotional. And again, you know, I think you want to, it's always a difficult question to answer, because I think you want to simplify, but you don't want to oversimplify. You don't want to dumb your story down. That's why I think it takes practice. You want to personalize your story to get emotion in there, but you don't want it to get self-absorbed. You don't want the story to be too personal. So you can err in any direction. You can exaggerate in any direction. And that's why I think it takes some practice. But I would say those things. I would say make it authentic, make it personal, and simplify it. Okay? Those are the things I say the most to the people that I work with. Does that make sense? You probably have some things of your own to add. Yeah? Okay.
Okay, a big thanks to John.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.